This is the fifth and final video in a series covering Chapter 2 of Government in America, focusing on the Constitution. This is just a quick video to kind of wrap up a couple of things now that we've gone over the actual structure of the Constitution. The first thing to discuss is just the ratification. Once this thing was written, how did it become official? Why do we actually use it? And what the writers of the Constitution said was that if 9 of the states agreed to follow this new Constitution, then the Constitution would replace the Articles of Confederation. So once the document was done, there were several months of campaigning where people who were in favor of the new Constitution, who were known as Federalists, tried to get support for it, and people who were against the new Constitution, who wound up taking the name Anti-Federalists, tried to get people to, squash it down and go back and keep the Articles of Confederation. There were two big worries that the Anti-Federalists kept coming back to. Number one is they were concerned that this new, stronger national government would weaken the state's independence, would mean that Pennsylvania and Virginia and New York and South Carolina would all kind of have to go in the same direction, even if they didn't want to. And there were people that were concerned about that. The second concern was that the Constitution, with only a few exceptions, didn't spell out the rights that the citizens would have. Now remember, going back to the beginning of our discussion, this idea that human beings have natural rights and that the government has to respect and protect those rights was a big deal in America in the 1700s. And so a lot of states had started actually putting down on paper, here's what the rights are. Here's what the government cannot do. And the United States Constitution did not do that. It did not spell it out. The Federalists originally said, well, we don't need that. We don't want to, write everything down because, that kind of makes things more complicated. But the Anti-Federalists were really, really firm on this second point about rights. And so the Federalists decided, okay, here's what we'll do. If we approve the Constitution, then as soon as we get everything in place, we'll have the Congress put some amendments into the Constitution, which will actually create that list of rights that you're asking for. So that's how we wound up with the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which those first 10 are more than 1/3 of all of the amendments that have been passed since the Constitution was ratified, because it's really hard to amend the United States Constitution. Okay? First, you have to get 2/3 of the people in the House of Representatives plus 2/3 of the people in the Senate to approve the potential amendment. So right there, that's a roadblock, because especially today, getting 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to vote on something and agree on it is very difficult. But then even once you get that done, the amendment isn't official yet. You still have to go back to the states, because remember, originally you looked at the states as being independent, and so you didn't want the national government to just impose a big constitutional change on the states. The states needed to have their say. So then the states need to have votes on it. Either the state legislatures or the states can hold special meetings. And then 3/4 of the states have to say yes to the amendment. And this is a very difficult thing. It winds up making it hard to get certain amendments passed. For example, in the 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of activism and a lot of movement towards creating the Equal Rights Amendment, an amendment that would make it unconstitutional to discriminate on the basis of gender. And this amendment got the 2/3 in the House, got the 2/3 in the Senate, but then it fell a few states short, depending on exactly how you're doing the counting, of getting the 3/4, and so the Equal Rights Amendment did not pass. It's not part of the Constitution. So we actually have 27 actual amendments that have been passed. 10 of them, the first 10, are the Bill of Rights, the list of specific rights of the citizens, which we'll talk about when we look at the specific text of the Constitution. 3 more of the amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, came about as a result of the American Civil War and dealt with how the United States was going to deal with the end of slavery and all of the freed African Americans and those situations going forward. So that was a big time of turmoil that led to those 3 amendments. Then you have 2 amendments that actually cancel each other out. You have the 18th Amendment, which prohibited the manufacture and sale of alcohol. And then you had the 21st Amendment, which canceled that out and undid it. And then, the most recent amendment, the 27th, was originally proposed back in the 1790s with the other 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, but 3/4 of the states didn't get around to approving it until the 90s, the 1990s. So it's our most recent amendment, the 27th, but it was originally written more than 200 years ago. So that gives you a sense of how hard it is to officially change the United States Constitution. But as you'll see when you look at the text, and as we'll talk about as we go into how the government works, the Constitution is written vaguely enough, with enough sort of wiggle room, that the way we look at the Constitution has changed a lot over 200 years. And there's a little bit of informal flexibility where we, the people, can sort of agree that we're going to view things in one way or the other in order to allow the government to do what we decide is necessary. And that leads to a lot of arguments to this day about whether or not we're interpreting the Constitution correctly. But it's also the way that this document that's 200 years old and very hard to revise is able to remain, relevant and still a functioning system of government. So those are some things that we'll be looking at as we move through the future.